St. Thomas is one of the Virgin Islands in the Caribbean Sea and, together with St. John and Water Island, forms a county and constituent district of the United States Virgin Islands, an unincorporated territory of the United States. Located on the island is the territorial capital and port of Charlotte Amalia. As of the 2010 census, the population of St. Thomas was 51,634, about 48.5% of the U.S. Virgin Islands total. The district has a land area of 31.24 square miles. History. Pre-colonial history. The island was originally settled around 1500 BC by the Saboni people. They were later replaced by the Arawakes and then the Caribs. Christopher Columbus sighted the island in 1493 on his second voyage to the New World. Danish colonial period. The Dutch West India Company established a post on St. Thomas in 1657. The first congregation was the St. Thomas Reformed Church, which was established in 1660 and was associated with the Dutch Reformed Church. The land was divided into plantations and sugarcane production became the primary economic activity. As a result, the economies of St. Thomas and the neighboring islands of St. John and St. Croix became highly dependent on slave labor and the slave trade. In 1685, the Brandenburgisch Afrikanische Compagnie took control of the slave trade on St. Thomas, and for some time the largest slave auctions in the world were held there. St. Thomas's fine natural harbour became known as Tafis, for the drinking establishments located nearby. In 1691, the primary settlement there was renamed Charlotte Amalia in honour of the wife of Denmark's King Christian V. It was later declared a free port by Frederick V. In December 1732, the first two of many Moravian Brethren missionaries came from Herrnhut, Saxony in present-day Germany to minister to them. Distrusted at first by the white masters, they lived among the slaves and soon won their confidence. From 1796 a small Jewish community developed in Charlotte Amalia. It established a historic synagogue, Berat Shalom Vejmiluth Hasidim, the oldest synagogue in continuous use in the United States. The first British invasion and occupation of the Danish West Indies occurred at the end of March 1801 when a British fleet arrived at St. Thomas. The Danes accepted the Articles of Capitulation the British proposed and the British occupied the islands without a shot being fired. The British occupation lasted until April 1802, when the British returned the islands to Denmark. The second British invasion of the Danish West Indies took place in December 1807 when a British fleet captured St. Thomas on the 22nd of December and Santa Cruz on the 25th of December. The Danes did not resist and the invasion was bloodless. This British occupation of the Danish West Indies lasted until the 20th of November 1815, when Britain returned the islands to Denmark. While the sugar trade had brought prosperity to the island's free citizens, by the early 19th century St. Thomas was in decline. The continued export of sugar was threatened by hurricanes, drought, and American competition. Following the Danish Revolution of 1848, slavery was abolished and the resulting rise in labor costs further weakened the position of St. Thomas's sugar producers. Given its harbors and fortifications, St. Thomas still retained a strategic importance, and thus, in the 1860s, during the American Civil War and its aftermath, the United States government considered buying the island and its neighbors from Denmark for $7.5 million. However, the proponents of the purchase failed to gain legislative support for the bid. David Hamilton Jackson. As the islands were poorly managed by the Danes, a local islander, David Hamilton Jackson, was instrumental in persuading the Danish to allow the U.S. to purchase the islands of St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix. In 1915, he traveled to Denmark and convinced the King of Denmark to allow freedom of the press in the islands. He began the first newspaper in the islands, known as the Herald. After this, he organized labor unions among the islanders for better working conditions. The islands now have an annual celebration to honor the legacy of David Hamilton Jackson. American acquisition in 1917. St. Thomas was purchased by the United States for $25 million in gold, as part of a defensive strategy to maintain control over the Caribbean and the Panama Canal during the First World War. The transfer occurred on March 31, 1917, behind Fort Christian before the barracks that now housed the legislature of the U.S. Virgin Islands. The baccalaureate service for the transfer was held at the St. Thomas Reformed Church, as it was identified as the American Church in the Danish West Indies. Percival Wilson Sparks, a U.S. naval officer, designed the flag that now represents the United States Virgin Islands. Sparks married a local U.S. Virgin Island woman, Grace Joseph Sparks, when Sparks' superior, Rear Admiral Summer Ely Wetmore Kittle, commissioned the design for the flag. Sparks asked his wife and her sister, Blanche Joseph, to sew the first flag. That flag was used until such time as a factory-produced flag could be acquired. The flag's inspiration came from the U.S. presidential seal. Sparks decided to have the eagle facing the olive branches rather than the arrows. Every year Transfer Day is recognized as a holiday, to celebrate the acquisition of the islands by the United States in 1917. U.S. citizenship was granted to the residents in 1927. The U.S. Department of the Interior took over administrative duties in 1931. American forces were based on the island during the Second World War. In 1954, passage of the U.S. Virgin Islands Organic Act officially granted territorial status to the three islands, and allowed for the formation of a local Senate with politics dominated by the American Republican and Democratic parties. Full home rule was achieved in 1970. The post-war era also saw the rise of tourism on the island. With relatively cheap air travel and the American embargo on Cuba, the numbers of visitors greatly increased. Despite natural disasters such as Hurricane Hugo and Hurricanes Lewis and Marilyn, the island's infrastructure continues to improve as the flow of visitors continues. Hotels have been built from the West End to the East End. Climate. Demographics. St. Thomas is divided into the following subdistricts: Charlotte Amalia Town, East End, North Side, South Side, Tutu, Water Island, West End. Transportation. The island is serviced by the Cyril E. King Airport. Passenger and limited car ferry services to neighboring islands such as Water Island, St. John, St. Croix, and the British Virgin Islands run regularly out of the Red Hook Terminal, Charlotte Amalia, and Crown Bay Marina. The United States Virgin Islands is the only place under United States jurisdiction where the rule of the road is to drive on the left. This was inherited from what was the then current Danish practice at the time of the American acquisition in 1917. However, because St. Thomas is a U.S. territory, most cars are imported from the mainland United States, and therefore the steering column is located on the left side of the vehicle. The island has many regular taxis from compact-sized to large vans, as well as open-air, covered trucks called safaris, with bench seats. The latter usually operate only between high-traffic points, e.g., cruise ship terminals at Havensite and Crown Bay and downtown Charlotte Amalia. Education. St. Thomas Street. John's School District operates public schools on St. Thomas, private schools on St. Thomas, Antilles School, Virgin Islands Montessori School and International Academy, Cavalry Christian Academy. Parochial schools on St. Thomas, All Saints Cathedral School, Saints Peter and Paul Catholic School, Wesleyan Academy Bible School. Colleges and universities on St. Thomas, University of the Virgin Islands. Notable people: Alton Augustus Adams, first African-American band master for the United States Navy. Edward Wilmot Blyden Ambassador, an Igbo in diaspora, is credited in some history books as having laid the foundation of West African nationalism and Pan-Africanism. Calyx Crab Major League Baseball player. Midori Cummings Major League Baseball player. Hannah Davis fashion model. Charles St. Clair Deville a French geologist. Henry St. Clair Deville a French chemist. Kelsey Grammer actor, director, and producer born in St. Thomas. Emile Griffith former boxer who won world championships in both the welterweight and middleweight divisions. Elrod Hendricks Major League Baseball player. Roy Innes civil rights leader. Julian Jackson boxer born in St. Thomas. J. Raymond Jones political activist. Al McBean Major League Baseball player. Ralph Moses Payuanski governor. Calvin Pickering Major League Baseball player. Camille Pissarro a key member of the French Impressionist group of painters. Rashawn Ross trumpeter who tours with Dave Matthews Band. Roy Lester Schneider governor and physician. Karine Steffens former hip-hop music video performer and actress and the author of Confessions of a Video Vixen. Morris Simmons German physician, pathologist, described a syndrome of pituitary failure with emaciation. Terence Todman ambassador. Jean Tassan, jazz tenor and soprano saxophonist. Peter von Scholten Governor-General. Denmark Vesey leader of planned slave uprising in Charleston, South Carolina. David Levy Yulee an American politician and the first member of the United States Senate to have been, at one time, a practicing Jew. Points of interest. Blackbeard's Castle, Buck Island National Wildlife Refuge. Cathedral Church of All Saints. Fort Christian. Magens Bay Arboretum. Magens Bay. Saints Peter and Paul Cathedral. St. Thomas Reformed Church. St. Thomas Synagogue. Coral World Ocean Park. St. John's Bay Rum Factory. Gallery. Blackbeard's Castle in Charlotte, Amalia. The Port of Charlotte, Amalia, March 2008. Beautiful Harbour of St. Thomas, West Indies. Stereoptical view. 1900. Magens Beach a scene from Drake's Seat. St. Thomas, USVI. View from Bluebeard's Castle, St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. View of Bluebeard's Castle, from in town. St. Thomas Shopping Square. Beautiful scenery.